The first contraction came as Wren crossed the boundary stones of Silver Hollow territory, as if her body knew the precise moment she ceased to belong anywhere. Behind her, the pack howled in celebration of her banishment. Before her, the forest stretched dark and endless, indifferent to whether she lived or died. She kept walking. Her herb satchel banged against her hip with each step, its familiar weight the only comfort she had left. Alpha Corwin had not even allowed her time to gather more supplies. He had declared her a burden on pack resources, conveniently ignoring the dozens of lives her healing skills had saved over the years. Garrett, the father of the child currently trying to claw its way out of her body, had stood in the crowd and studied his boots, as if they held the secrets of the universe. Not once had he looked up. Not once had he spoken in her defense. 23 years Wren had lived among the Silver Hollow wolves. 23 years of healing their sick, tending their wounded, brewing the teas that eased their pregnancies, and the tinctures that soothed their elders into peaceful deaths. And they had cast her out like refuse, one day before she was due to give birth, because her wolf was too weak to shift, and the alpha's son had decided to take an interest in her. The second contraction bent her double 40 minutes later. Wren gripped a tree trunk and breathed through it, counting heartbeats until the pain released its hold. Her grandmother had taught her everything about birth, from the mechanics of delivery to the herbs that eased labor. She had assisted at more births than she could count, had caught slippery newborns in her steady hands, had saved mothers who should have died. None of that knowledge made facing her own labor, alone in a freezing forest, any less terrifying. She forced her legs to carry her onward. The nearest pack territory was half a day's journey on foot. She would never make it. The contractions were too close together, the pressure in her pelvis too insistent. Her daughter was coming whether Wren was ready or not. The crossroads came into view just as twilight surrendered to true dark. An ancient oak stood sentinel at the intersection, its trunk so massive that 3 people could not have linked hands around it. The tree had stood for centuries, weathering storms and wars and the endless passage of time. It would witness her birth, one way or another. Wren's legs buckled, and she let herself slide down to rest against the bark. She would go no further tonight. This tree would shelter her, or it would mark her grave. She had perhaps 4 hours, judging by the intervals between contractions. 4 hours to prepare. Working with hands that shook from cold and fear, Wren gathered fallen leaves into a nest, spread her cloak over them, and inventoried her satchel by touch. Dried yarrow for bleeding. Shepherd's purse if the yarrow was not enough. A small vial of willow bark tincture for pain, though not enough to truly help. Her herb knife, sharp enough to cut the cord. A length of clean linen she always carried because a healer never knew when clean linen might mean the difference between life and death. It was not enough. It would have to be enough. The hours blurred into a haze of agony. Wren bit through the leather strap of her satchel to keep from screaming, muffling the sounds that wanted to tear from her throat. She talked herself through each stage, a clinical narration that kept panic at bay. She was dilating. She was transitioning. The urge to push was building, irresistible and primal. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Trust your body, child. Women have been doing this since the dawn of time. Your body knows what to do. Listen to it. So Wren listened. She panted through the contractions. She changed positions when instinct demanded it. She pressed her back against the rough bark of the oak and let her body work, marveling even through the pain at the sheer power of what was happening. She was creating life. She was bringing a new soul into the world. The moon hung overhead, silver and pitiless, when Wren's daughter slid into her waiting hands. The baby's first cry shattered the forest silence, thin and reedy but gloriously alive, and Wren sobbed with relief as tiny limbs flailed against her chest. Alive. Her daughter was alive. She tied and cut the cord with practiced efficiency, years of training overriding the trembling in her hands. She cleaned the baby's face, wiped the birth fluids from the tiny nose and mouth, and wrapped the precious bundle in the soft linen from her satchel. Her underdress joined the wrapping, leaving Wren in only her outer dress against the cold, but she did not care. Nothing mattered except the small, warm weight against her breast. Ivy, she whispered, the name coming to her fully formed. You are Ivy, and you are strong, and you are loved. Whatever else happens, remember that. Your mother loves you more than anything in this world or any other. Ivy nuzzled toward her mother's breast with instincts older than language, tiny mouth seeking sustenance. Wren helped her latch, wincing at the unfamiliar pull, and leaned back against the oak. The afterbirth still needed to pass. She was still bleeding, though not dangerously. She was half frozen and weak, and utterly alone. But she had done it. She had brought her daughter into the world with nothing but her own knowledge and will. Every healer who had dismissed her, every pack member who had looked through her as if she did not exist, every person who had told her she was worthless because her wolf was weak, they could all burn in eternal fire. She had just delivered her own child, alone, in a frozen forest, and both of them were alive. She was not worthless. She was remarkable. The hoofbeats came perhaps an hour later when Wren had drifted into a light doze. She jerked awake, arm curling protectively around Ivy, and squinted toward the torchlight flickering through the trees. Riders. Multiple, from the sound. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She reached for her herb knife, though what she thought she could do against mounted strangers while bleeding and cradling a newborn, she could not say. The first rider burst into view and pulled his horse to a violent halt not 10 feet from her makeshift nest. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvering at the temples. Rich traveling clothes marked him as someone of means. His face, what she could see of it in the torchlight, was sharp with shock, and something else she could not identify. He was off his horse and striding toward her before she could decide whether to scream or beg. "Moon above," he breathed, and his voice was rough with something that sounded almost like pain. "You are real. I thought my wolf had finally lost all sense, leading me off the main road in the middle of the night. But you are real." Wren clutched Ivy tighter. "Stay back. I have a knife." The man stopped, though clearly not because of her threat. His nostrils flared as he inhaled deeply, and a shudder ran through his massive frame. His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, there was something wild and desperate in their depths. "You just gave birth, alone, in the forest." He looked around at the leaves stained with blood and birth, at her cloak spread on the ground, at the evidence of her solitary ordeal. His jaw tightened until the muscles jumped. "Where is your pack? Where is your mate? Where is anyone who should be protecting you?" It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "My pack rejected me. I have no mate. And I have no one, as you can clearly see." Something dangerous flickered across his features, something that made the air feel heavy and charged. What pack? Silver Hollow. She did not know why she told him. She did not know why his fury on her behalf made something warm kindle in her chest. Perhaps she was simply too exhausted to be cautious. "It does not matter now. I need to find shelter for my daughter before we both freeze." He was already removing his cloak, heavy wool lined with thick fur that probably cost more than everything Wren had ever owned combined. Before she could protest, he had wrapped it around her shoulders. The heat of it, still carrying his body warmth, nearly made her weep. He smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else. Something that made her weak wolf stir from the slumber it had inhabited since she was 13 years old. That stirring should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "I am Theodore," he said, and the name tugged at her memory, trying to connect with something important she should know. I am taking you to my palace. You will have shelter, food, healers, anything you need. Can you stand? Theodore. The name finally connected with knowledge, and Wren's breath caught in her throat. Theodore Blackmore. The Alpha King of the Seven Packs, the most powerful wolf in the realm, was currently kneeling before her in the dirt, his expensive clothes staining with mud and worse, looking at her like she was the answer to a prayer. I can try, she managed. She could not, in the end. Her legs refused to cooperate, trembling uselessly when she attempted to rise. Theodore solved the problem by lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, Ivy still cradled against her chest. He called orders to the guards who had finally caught up with him, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. And then he was mounting his horse and settling her before him, her back against his broad chest, his arms encircling them both. Hold tight to your daughter, he said against her hair. We ride hard. The journey was a blur of motion and warmth, and the thunder of hooves. Theodore held her secure against him, his heat seeping into her frozen body, his strength making up for her complete lack thereof. Ivy slept through it all, content and warm against her mother's breast, oblivious to the strangeness of the night. Wren should have been afraid. A strange alpha, no matter how powerful, had swept her up and carried her off like a prize. She knew nothing of his character or intentions. And yet her wolf, that whisper of instinct she had spent her life trying to ignore, purred with contentment. Safe, it seemed to say. This one is safe. This one is ours. She did not let herself think about what that meant. Not yet. Not when she was so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open. Not when she was still bleeding from childbirth. Not when her entire world had shattered and reformed in the space of a single night. The palace emerged from the darkness like something out of a story, all towering spires and glittering windows. Torches blazed in brackets along the walls. Guards snapped to attention as they passed. Theodore barked orders as they entered the courtyard, and servants scattered to obey. Wren found herself carried through echoing corridors and deposited in a chamber larger than the house she had grown up in, with a fire already roaring in the massive hearth and a bed piled with furs so thick and soft she could have drowned in them. An older woman appeared almost immediately, round and weathered, with kind eyes and efficient hands that spoke of decades of experience. She introduced herself as Agnes, the royal midwife, and her examination of both Wren and Ivy was swift and thorough. Healthy, both of them, Agnes pronounced, and Wren heard the wonder in the old woman's voice. Though the mother needs rest, warmth, and several good meals. She delivered this child herself, in a forest, and did a better job than half the midwives I have trained. The cord is tied perfectly. The baby is cleaned and nursing well. This woman knows what she is doing. Theodore stood by the door, watching with an intensity that made Wren's skin prickle. She could feel his gaze like a physical touch, though she was too tired to look at him directly. Whatever she needs, he said. Have the kitchens prepare whatever she wants. Assign servants to attend her. She lacks nothing. I need to understand what is happening, Wren said, her voice stronger now that warmth was seeping back into her bones. Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. Theodore's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. His gray eyes searched her face as if looking for something, and whatever he saw there made his expression soften almost imperceptibly. Rest first, he said finally. We will talk when you are stronger. He left before she could argue, his footsteps retreating down the corridor. Wren noticed, even through her exhaustion, that he gripped the doorframe for balance as he went. She noticed, too, the gray pallor beneath his tan and the faint tremor in his hands. Details her healer's mind catalogued without permission. Something was wrong with the Alpha King. The thought should have been distant, academic. She was a stranger here, a charity case at best. His health was none of her concern. But her healer's instincts did not care about propriety. They catalogued symptoms without permission. Pallor, tremor, fatigue, loss of appetite evident in the way his clothes hung slightly loose on his frame. He was ill, he was hiding it. And whatever ailed him, it was serious. Agnes helped Wren bathe and change into a soft nightgown of white linen, so fine it felt like wearing clouds. She ensured Ivy was fed and clean and settled in a beautiful carved cradle that appeared as if by magic, its wood polished to a golden sheen. She brought broth and bread and sat with Wren while she ate, sharing gossip about the palace staff, as if Wren were a welcome guest rather than a bewildering intruder. "The king," Wren said finally, when Agnes paused for breath. "Has he been well?" Agnes's cheerful expression flickered just for an instant. "His Majesty works too hard. The burden of rule weighs heavily on any man." It was a non-answer, and they both knew it. Wren let it go, but she did not forget. Over the following days, she watched. Theodore visited her chamber twice each day, morning and evening, bringing small gifts, a book of herbal remedies from the palace library, its pages yellowed with age and filled with knowledge Wren had never seen. A warm shawl in deep green that matched her eyes, a carved wooden wolf for Ivy to grasp when she was old enough, its details so fine it must have taken weeks to make. He asked after her health, her needs, her comfort. He held Ivy with surprising gentleness when Wren needed both hands free, cradling the tiny body against his broad chest as if he had done it 1,000 times before. He spoke of his kingdom, his duties, his hopes for peace among the packs. He made her laugh with dry observations about pompous courtiers and feuding nobles. He never spoke of why he had rescued her. He never mentioned the way his wolf had apparently led him to that crossroads in the middle of the night. He never acknowledged what they both knew, but neither had named aloud. And Wren continued to catalog symptoms. The palace served rich food at every meal, but Theodore barely touched his plate. He dismissed court early each afternoon, claiming paperwork, but Wren caught glimpses of him retreating to his chambers with the careful walk of a man conserving energy. She saw him stumble in a corridor when he thought himself unobserved, catching himself against the wall with a muttered curse. She noticed the shadows deepening beneath his eyes, the silver spreading at his temples faster than age alone could explain. 3 days after her arrival, she encountered Marcus Greyhaven, the king's beta, in the palace gardens. She had been searching for familiar herbs to restock her satchel, and he had been watching her with suspicious eyes from behind a row of dormant rose bushes. "You spend a great deal of time observing the king," Marcus said without preamble, stepping into her path. Wren met his gaze steadily. She was not intimidated by his size or his rank. She had faced down worse. "He is dying." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stepped back, face draining of color, and for a moment Wren thought he might shift and attack her where she stood. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and a growl rumbled in his chest. "What do you know of it?" His voice was a dangerous growl. "I know the symptoms of slow poisoning when I see them. Pallor, tremor, fatigue, loss of appetite, degradation of the wolf-spirit connection. Whatever was given to him acts gradually, designed to appear as natural illness. He has perhaps 2 or 3 months remaining at this rate." She paused, considering. "Less, if he continues to push himself as he has been." Marcus stared at her. The hostility in his eyes had transformed into something raw and desperate, the expression of a man who had been watching his closest friend die and could do nothing to stop it. "You can see this? After 3 days? I am a healer. It is what I do. It is what I have always done, though no one ever thought to ask my opinion. Our healers found nothing. Every physician in the realm has examined him. They claim exhaustion, stress, the weight of leadership." Wren shrugged. They looked for illness. They should have looked for murder. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Marcus looked like a man who had been drowning and just spotted solid ground. Can you save him? I need to examine him properly. I need to identify the specific poison. Then I can tell you whether a cure exists. That evening, Wren made her way to Theodore's private study. Ivy bundled against her chest in a sling Agnes had provided. She did not knock. She simply walked in and found the king slumped at his desk, quill fallen from trembling fingers, documents blurring before unfocused eyes. He looked up at her entrance, and for a moment, his mask slipped. She saw exhaustion so profound it made her heart ache. She saw a man who had been fighting alone for too long, who was slowly losing a battle he could not even name. You should be resting, he said, straightening with visible effort. Agnes said you are still recovering. And you should be dead within the season if someone does not intervene. She closed the door behind her. I want to examine you. Theodore's expression shuddered. The mask slammed back into place. I do not require examination. You require a great deal more than that. But examination is where we start. She settled into the chair across from his desk, adjusting Ivy's sling so the sleeping baby rested more comfortably. I have already noted the pallor, the tremor, the fatigue, the loss of appetite. Your wolf is becoming distant, difficult to reach. Food tastes like ash. You wake weaker each morning than you were the night before. Each observation landed like an arrow finding its mark. Theodore's mask cracked, revealing exhaustion and something that looked terribly like relief. How long have you known? He asked quietly. Since the first morning. You gripped the doorframe for balance when you left my chamber. A healthy alpha does not need support to walk. He laughed, a broken sound. 3 days. You found in 3 days what every healer in my kingdom missed in 3 months. They were not looking for poison. They assumed illness because you are their king, and no one wants to believe that someone is actively murdering you. She leaned forward. Will you let me try to help? Theodore studied her for a long moment. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of trust against suspicion. She was a stranger, after all, an unknown quantity. For all he knew, she could be part of whatever plot was destroying him. But she also saw exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of a man who had been fighting alone for too long. Why would you help me? He asked. You owe me nothing. You saved my life and my daughter's life. You gave us shelter when we had none. Regardless of any... She hesitated. Any other factors? I pay my debts. Other factors? Wren held his gaze. We both know what we are to each other. I may have a weak wolf, but even I can recognize a mate connection when it makes my wolf wake up for the first time in a decade. We can discuss what that means later. Right now, my concern is keeping you alive long enough to have that conversation. Something flickered in Theodore's eyes. Hope, perhaps? Or simply surprise that she had addressed it so directly. He extended his wrist to her. Then examine me, healer. She took his wrist in her fingers, finding the pulse point, and tried to ignore the jolt of connection that sparked at the contact. His pulse was thready, irregular, the rhythm of a heart under siege. His skin was too warm in some places, too cool in others, as the poison disrupted his body's natural regulation. I need samples, she said, keeping her voice professional through sheer force of will. Blood, if you can spare it. Hair, sweat, ideally from a fever, if you have those. I have fevers most nights now. Wren nodded grimly. Then I will need access to a still room and the palace library's medical texts. The older the texts, the better. This poison is not a common one, or someone would have identified it already. You will have whatever you need. 3 days later, Wren had her answer. The still room she had claimed smelled of dried herbs and old magic, copper vessels and glass vials crowding every surface. She had not slept in 30 hours. Ivy rested in a basket nearby, peaceful and oblivious, while her mother pored over a text so old that its pages crumbled at the edges. Shadow's bane. Her grandmother had mentioned it once, on a winter night when the fire burned low and the old woman's memories flowed like water. A poison so rare that it had not been used in over a century. The ingredients were difficult to obtain. The preparation required expert knowledge, and the result was a toxin that killed over months, degrading the wolf-spirit connection until the victim simply faded away. To any observer, it would appear as natural decline. But there was a cure. Difficult, dangerous, and agonizing for the patient, but a cure nonetheless. Her grandmother had known because her grandmother had cured someone of it decades ago. She had written down the treatment in a personal journal that had passed to Wren upon her death. Wren had memorized every word, never imagining she would need them. Now those words might save a king's life. Marcus found her still reading at dawn, and she told him what she had discovered. His reaction was immediate and fierce. They would begin treatment at once. They would tell no one. They would trust no one but each other and Agnes, who Marcus vouched for absolutely. There is one more thing, Wren said carefully. Whoever did this had access to the king's food or drink. They had knowledge of rare poisons. They are probably still in the palace, and when they realize Theodore is recovering, they will not simply accept defeat. Marcus's expression hardened into something cold and deadly. Then we will protect you both. The first stage of treatment began that evening in Theodore's chambers. Wren explained the process. 3 stages over 7 days. The antidote would force the poison out, but the process would make him sicker before he improved. The first night would be the worst. She was right. Theodore's fever spiked within an hour of the first dose. He thrashed in his bed, soaking through sheets, crying out in a delirium that stripped away all his kingly composure. He called for his mother, dead these 7 years. He begged for water. He cursed enemies real and imagined. He spoke of battles fought and friends lost and the loneliness of a crown. Wren stayed at his bedside through all of it, Agnes assisting when the king's strength made him difficult to control. She bathed his forehead with cool cloths. She adjusted his position when his muscles cramped. She held his hand when he gripped hers with bruising force, and she did not pull away. She hummed lullabies from her own childhood, songs her grandmother had sung to her, and somehow they seemed to soothe him through the worst of it. Dawn found Theodore wrung out and panting, but alive. His fever had broken. His pulse, when Wren checked it, was stronger than it had been in months. "It is working," she told Marcus, who had maintained a silent vigil by the door. "The first stage is complete." The days that followed established a rhythm. Wren administered treatment. She monitored Theodore's progress. She mixed herbs and compounds in the still room, checking and double-checking her work. She rarely slept. She rarely ate unless Agnes stood over her and refused to leave until she did. And somewhere in those exhausted, desperate days, something changed between her and the king. Theodore was conscious and alert by the 4th day, propped against pillows while Wren changed his bandages and checked his temperature. He watched her work with an expression she could not quite name. "Tell me about your life," he said. "Before." So she told him. She told him about her weak wolf, about the pack that tolerated but never accepted her. She told him about her grandmother, the only person who had ever believed in her gifts. She told him about learning to heal, about saving lives that no one credited her for, about being invisible in her own home. She told him about Garrett, the warrior who had pursued her when she was lonely enough to believe his interest was genuine, who had abandoned her the moment Alpha Corwin's son showed her passing attention, and Garrett feared political consequences. Theodore's growl at that part of the story made the windows rattle. "He will answer for it," Theodore said. and there was nothing idle about the threat. He does not matter. Ren finished changing the bandage and sat back. Ivy is mine, and she is the only good thing that came from knowing him. The rest, I have already forgotten. You are remarkable. Theodore caught her hand before she could rise. You know that, yes? Everything you have endured, everything you have accomplished with no support and no recognition. And now you are saving my life with knowledge no one else possesses. You are extraordinary. Ren's cheeks heated. I am doing what any healer would do. Any healer would have identified Shadow's bane? Any healer would have stayed awake for 3 days preparing an antidote? Any healer would have faced down an Alpha King and told him he was dying? He shook his head. You are not any healer. You are unlike anyone I have ever known. She did not know what to say to that. No one had ever looked at her the way Theodore was looking at her now. Not with pity, not with condescension, but with genuine admiration, wonder even. I should check on Ivy, she managed, and fled. But she could not flee what was growing between them. She could not flee the way her wolf stirred whenever he was near, could not ignore how his scent had become necessary to her, could not pretend that her dedication to his recovery was purely professional. She was falling for him, not because he was her mate, though he was, not because he was powerful or wealthy or handsome. She was falling for the man who held her daughter with heartbreaking gentleness, who asked about her day and actually listened to the answers, who looked at her expertise and saw strength rather than strangeness. The 6th night of treatment, she was returning from the still room with the final dose of antidote when the attack came. They materialized from the shadows between torches, 2 men in dark clothes with covered faces. One grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms with brutal force. The other reached for the vial in her hands. Ren did not think. She bit the hand covering her mouth, tasting blood, and when the grip loosened, she twisted free. Her herb knife was in her hand before she consciously decided to draw it. The blade found flesh, and one attacker howled and stumbled back. But the other was faster, stronger. He slammed her against the wall, and pain exploded in her side where his knife had slipped between her ribs. Ren kept the antidote vial clutched to her chest even as she slid down the wall, even as darkness crept at the edges of her vision. Then Marcus was there, a war cry ripping from his throat, and the corridor became chaos. Steel clashed, bodies hit stone. Someone gurgled their last breath. When silence fell, Ren was pressed against the wall with her knife raised, blood dripping from her side, the antidote still protected against her chest. Marcus stood over 2 bodies, sword dripping red. The king, Ren gasped. The antidote. He needs the final dose. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. You are stabbed, and your first thought is the treatment? He will die without it. I will survive. Help me up. They delivered the final dose together. Ren's hands steadied despite the wound in her side. Theodore's rage when he learned what had happened was terrible to witness, his weakened state doing nothing to diminish the fury that poured from him in waves. The assassins wore the colors of a minor Eastern house, Marcus reported grimly, loyal to Lady Seraphina Voss. Theodore went very still. Seraphina. It took 2 days to build the case, 2 days during which Ren refused to rest despite her injury, and Theodore refused to let her out of his sight. Agnes tended her wound with gentle efficiency, scolding her for her recklessness even as her eyes shone with admiration. Marcus stationed guards outside every door and window, trusting no one who had not proven their loyalty in blood. The evidence, when gathered, was damning beyond dispute. Seraphina's servants had supplied ingredients for Shadow's bane, their purchases tracked through merchant records and witness testimony. Her coded letters, discovered in a hidden compartment in her chambers, revealed the timeline of the poisoning in her own hand. She had documented everything with a perfectionist's care, never imagining her private journals would become her confession. Her hired killers, now dead, had served her family for generations. their loyalty purchased with gold and the promise of advancement. Theodore read the letters himself, his face growing harder with each page. Ren watched him from across the room, saw the moment he reached the passages where Seraphina described watching him weaken, the satisfaction she took in his suffering. His hands shook, not with illness now, but with rage barely contained. "She watched me dying," he said quietly. "She attended dinners and council meetings and watched me fade, and she smiled." Ren crossed to him, took the letters from his hands, and set them aside. "She is finished. That is what matters now." They brought Seraphina before the court in chains the following morning, and for the first time since Ren had arrived at the palace, her beautiful mask cracked. "You were supposed to be mine," she screamed at Theodore. "I was raised for you. I was perfect for you. And you rejected me for what? Compassion? Kindness? Weakness?" Her wild eyes found Ren. "And now you would choose this packless mongrel over me? This low-born nothing who cannot even shift?" Theodore's voice cut through her tirade like ice. "I rejected you because you see people as tools to be used. I am choosing Ren because she sees them as lives to be saved. The contrast could not be clearer." Seraphina's sentence was death, passed by the council without dissent. As the guards dragged her away, she turned one last time to Ren. "Others will come. You will never be safe. You are nothing, and you have stolen everything from me. I will haunt you from beyond the grave." "I did not steal anything." Ren's voice was calm, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. She felt no triumph in Seraphina's downfall, no satisfaction in her suffering, only relief that it was over. "You destroyed yourself with your own hatred. I simply happened to be here when the consequences arrived." The guards dragged Seraphina from the hall, her screams echoing off the stone walls until a heavy door slammed and silenced them. The court remained frozen, hundreds of wolves processing what they had witnessed. Their king, nearly murdered by a woman they had trusted. Their new Luna, the healer who had saved him. Theodore rose from his throne and extended his hand to Ren. She took it, and together they walked from the hall, leaving the whispers and the stares behind them. In the quiet of the corridor beyond, he pulled her into his arms and held her, saying nothing, needing nothing but her presence. They did not speak of Seraphina again. There was nothing more to say. 3 weeks later, autumn had given way to the first crisp promise of winter, and Theodore led Ren into the royal garden at dusk. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting warm pools of light over the last blooms of the season. Ivy slept in her basket nearby, attended by Agnes, who watched from a discreet distance with suspiciously bright eyes. "I wanted to do this properly," Theodore said. He held both of her hands in his thumbs tracing patterns on her palms. "Not in a sick room, not surrounded by crisis. Just us, with time to say what needs to be said." Ren's heart hammered against her ribs. "And what needs to be said? That I love you. Not because you saved my life, though you did. Not because you are my mate, though the moon goddess was generous beyond measure when she tied us together. I love you because you are fierce and brilliant and utterly yourself. I love you because you argue with me. I love you because you delivered your daughter alone in a frozen forest and named her something that grows toward the light. I love you because you see the world clearly and face it without flinching." He released one of her hands to cup her face, tilting it up toward him. "I want to take you as my Luna, not because I need a queen, but because I need you. Will you have me?" "I am not what people expect from a Luna," Ren whispered. "My wolf is weak. I cannot shift. I was rejected by my own pack. I have nothing to offer but—" "You offer everything." Theodore cut her off gently. "Your strength, your wisdom, your healing gift, your heart, which is braver than any warrior's. You are exactly what this kingdom needs. More importantly, you are exactly what I need." She thought about all the years of rejection, all the whispered insults and pointed exclusions, all the times she had been told she was not enough. And she thought about Theodore, who had never once made her feel that way, who looked at her like she hung the moon, who held her daughter as if Ivy were his own, who was offering her not a throne, but a home. "Yes," she said, "I will have you." His smile was brighter than the lantern light. He pulled her close, and when his lips brushed the curve of her throat, she tilted her head in invitation. The claiming mark burned as he made it, a sharp pleasure pain that radiated through every nerve. Something clicked into place inside her, a connection deeper than any she had ever known. The moon rose overhead, silver and approving, as the Alpha King and his healer became something new together. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Ren's life. Theodore recovered fully, his strength returning with each passing day, until he was once again the formidable Alpha who had united the 7 packs. But now, when he returned from council meetings or diplomatic negotiations, he came to find her. He sought her opinion on matters of state. He valued her insight into people's character, her healer's ability to see past pretense to the truth beneath. She established a healing academy in the palace, training young women and men who showed aptitude for the craft. No longer would knowledge like hers die with a single keeper. She wrote down everything her grandmother had taught her, creating texts that would serve future generations. Healers came from across the realm to study with the woman who had saved the Alpha King, and she turned none away. Ivy grew strong and healthy, surrounded by love. Theodore adopted her formally, giving her his name and his protection. The little girl would never know rejection, never feel the cold absence of a father's love. When she was old enough to understand, Ren would tell her the truth, but it would be a story of triumph, not tragedy. 1 month later, Ren woke in the royal chambers with Theodore's arm heavy across her waist and Ivy cooing in her nearby cradle. Snow fell outside the windows, the first true storm of winter, turning the world white and quiet. "Stay in bed," Theodore murmured against her shoulder. "It is too cold to rise." "You have a council meeting." "The council can wait. My Luna is warm and I am not moving." She laughed, the sound still strange to her after a lifetime of having so little to laugh about. Theodore made her laugh every day. He made her feel cherished and capable and essential. He looked at her expertise and saw not strangeness but strength. A knock interrupted their peaceful morning. Agnes entered with breakfast and news. A delegation from Silver Hollow Pack had arrived. They were requesting an audience, their tone desperate. Their pack was struggling, their healer recently dead, their alpha humbled by circumstance. Ren went still. Theodore felt the tension and rose onto one elbow, his expression darkening. "I will send them away. You never have to see them again." "No." She sat up slowly. "I want to face them." 2 hours later, she swept into the throne room in a gown of deep green velvet, a simple crown glinting in her copper hair. Theodore sat the throne beside her, recovered and powerful once more, his presence a silent warning to anyone who might think to disrespect his queen. Alpha Corwin knelt before them, and the sight of him, this man who had cast her out to die, brought Ren no satisfaction, no rage, only a distant kind of pity. "Luna Queen." His voice cracked on the words. "We have come to beg your forgiveness and your aid. Our pack suffers. We have lost our healer. We remembered. We remembered that you once served in that capacity. We hoped you might. You hoped I might save you." Ren finished. "After you cast me out to die. After you rejected me for crimes no greater than being born with a weak wolf." Corwin flinched. "We were wrong. We see that now. You see it because you need something from me." She let the words hang in the air for a moment. "I will send aid. A trained healer. Supplies. Whatever your pack requires." Not because you deserve it, but because the innocent wolves of Silver Hollow should not suffer for their alpha's cruelty. Corwin's relief was palpable. Thank you, Luna Queen. Thank you. But you should know something. Alpha Corwin. Ren's voice was quiet but carried through the silent hall. I never needed your acceptance. I never needed your pack's approval. Everything I am, I built myself. My knowledge, my skills, my strength. I earned every bit of it despite your rejection, not because of it. You did not make me. You only taught me that I did not need you. She rose from her throne and stepped down from the dais, stopping before her former alpha. Go home, care for your pack, and remember that the woman you threw away is the same woman who saved the Alpha King. Not with strength you valued, but with knowledge you dismissed. Perhaps that will teach you something about where true power lies. She turned and walked from the hall without waiting for his response, Theodore falling into step beside her. His hand found hers, warm and steady. You were magnificent, he said. I was honest. She leaned into his side as they walked. That is all I have ever been. In the nursery, Ivy waited with Agnes, reaching chubby hands toward her mother. Ren gathered her daughter close and breathed in the sweet baby scent, feeling Theodore's arms wrap around them both. She had been rejected by her pack one day before giving birth. The Alpha King had found her 1 hour after. And in between those 2 moments, everything she thought she knew about her life had shattered and reformed into something new. She was Luna of the 7 packs. She was mother to a daughter who would grow up loved and valued. She was partner to a king who saw her clearly and loved what he saw. She was finally, after 23 years of searching, home.